Paddle, 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 paddle.
Okay, we're
Don't
good.
shave.
So,
I
yeah,
just can't grow any facial hair. We're good to go, Steve?
whenever you want to start.
Sounds good. Well, welcome everyone to 340 Live, looking at ground crew from the paddler's perspective. What we are doing this session is we are looking at basically what the paddler's expectations and needs are. How many times do we have rookie paddlers who go out there and say, hey, ground crew, I need this, this, and this. And the ground crew says, yep, I'm going to do that. And they forget that that's a rookie paddler and they don't know what they need because they haven't been out there yet. So we're going to try and clarify a lot of that. I also want to point out that we will do a second ground crew webinar looking at all of the ground crew issues, parking, checkpoints, etc. in June. So we will be going back to this moving forward. But today, one other thing, because I'm very disorganized and have ADHD. So one other thing is this was going to be health and hydration. That isn't happening because things fell apart and I just decided to change it. So just letting you know, if you were looking for health and hydration, we're now doing ground crew. So we'll go from there. Joining me today on our panel, we have Laura Milby. She tends to do amazing things on the river, from ground crewing for her husband. 3 times she has raced mixed tandem in 2018. If she passes you in the fog at 6 in the morning, she will sing row, row, row your boat at you. This is Laura Milby, and yes, related to Ryan Milby of what is that? Alpaca rack fame?
Alpaca, yeah.
Some animal, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then we have the man, the myth, the legend, Scott Reeves, who has owned the tandem pedal division and the solo pedal division a couple of times. He was one of the first to take a pedal drive down the river in the 340. Before we worried about SUPs, before we worried about other boats, there was all sorts of conversation in 2010, 11 or so about whether a pedal drive could even get down the river. And he proved us all wrong and managed to make it. He has also ground crewed for me in 2018 and has or had at least one of the records. Which record did you have, Scott? Tandem?
I had solo pedal drive. I had 3-man pedal drive, but both of those are toast now. Yeah, leaving it on to the much faster folks.
Awesome. So this is our panel. Just a reminder on how things are working. This is a webinar. If you're on YouTube Live, you can leave questions down below, and Steve from River Relief will transfer them over to the Zoom. If you're on Zoom, we can't see you, but we can chat with you either through chat, or if you have a question, there's a Q&A function right down below here, and you can use that to send us a question. I will not necessarily bring up the questions as they come in. Some of them will hold to the end depending on how the conversation is going. Otherwise, let's get started. So you've both been chosen because you have both raced the 340 and you've been ground crew for the 340. So I guess my first question is, what's the difference? How does that racing experience change how you look at ground crewing? I'll start with Laura.
Well, I haven't ground crewed since I raced, so maybe you should start with Scott on that one.
We'll start with Scott.
Yeah, so I think I enjoyed ground crewing because I had raced first. But yeah, racing is simple. You just have to keep on going, and once you're on the river. Previous to the river, I build books out like this, so that my ground crew is prepared. There's plan A, B, Z, so on. But it's all about plan ahead of time so that the paddler can just go, or peddler, or supper, or whatever you do. We have a rower this year. So you can just go point to point. Generally speaking, you won't make a wrong turn on the river. The ground crew, on the other hand, is that's a much more stressful occasion, is just making sure that you're in the right place at the right time, and that your person you're supporting is on the shore as much or as little as they need to be, depending on what your goals are.
And excuse me. So which one is harder? You're saying basically ground crew is harder than racing.
I don't know. Ground crew is much more enjoyable because just racing gets hard, as we have all experienced. I would say the problem of racing is that mental game that we all end up approaching. Physically, obviously, it's hard, but the lack of sleep is true for both sides, at least in my experience. It's dealing with that and keeping your head straight. Hallucinations, all that stuff kind of pop up in both scenarios. Obviously, paddling is more physically hard, but knowing that person or persons are relying on you to be there with everything that they're hoping for, and maybe an ice cream cone too, randomly, knowing what you can do to support them is it's a tough world, and I don't think we could do the race without them. It's the big help.
All right. And Laura, what are your thoughts on which is harder, ground crew or racer?
Well, I'm going to preface with I've always ground crewed with kids. So for the people out there that always have the kid questions, first year was with a 9-week-old, second year was a 1-year-old. Third year, I was pregnant with our second, many months pregnant, and had a 2-year-old. So I think both are very difficult in their own way. I think just after paddling, it's harder, like you said, mentally and those things, but it's also like boring. You're just in the river going, and then you stop when you stop. Like there's just not a lot more other than keeping up on your food and drink. So boring's a bad word, but it's just like it's the mind, like keep yourself busy. But from ground crew, you're cleaning things, you're getting, your supplies ready, you're trying to get to the next spot, you're trying to get your shade set up, you're trying to stay fed yourself, you're trying to stay cool, and keeping in mind if your paddler's going faster or slower, those time crunches are different too. So it's completely subject to how fast you're running down the river. So our first year was slower than second and third. So we had more time that first year to figure things out. But yeah, it's just different what you're busy with, I guess.
And how did ground crewing change as Ryan got faster?
Well,
to give us some context, what was his time the first year?
Oh gosh, I should probably know that. I want to say, he's going to kill me if I'm off here, or probably won't care. 50 something, 58, maybe 56, somewhere around there. I'm guessing. That's a real big guess. And then he was sub 50 the second year. And then I have no idea on year 3. I honestly didn't care, to be honest with you. I was just like, finish the race. I want to go have this baby and be done. So, when they get faster, you have less time as a ground crew to get things done in between. And the paddler has to be more aware of that, because you can't ask for things that you just want on a whim, because your ground crew is not going to have time to go get it. When you're in the middle of Missouri, there's not fast food everywhere. There's not Walmarts everywhere. There's not, places to just jump and go get something. So, as they're getting faster, you may end up with 3 hours till the next checkpoint, or depending on when you decide to stop. And I know we'll probably talk about that part of it, but it's, you just have to kind of organize your time a little bit more efficiently. And you get less luxury. If they're going faster, you don't have probably a night where you're sleeping or getting much sleep. You're traveling to your next place and trying to get, set up and get everything organized again and get squared away. So.
You know, in talking to my wife, who was my ground crew for many of the years, our first year was just survive it. After 2 years of preparing and flood out, we so 2012 then was our first year. So we were just survive it. We were in a wreck canoe, and we're gonna do this. And it was all about like, how can we manage our time on the river and on shore that made sense. And so it's a completely different problem to have, because instead of like crewing for someone who's going under 50 hours, it's all about, hey, I got the right stuff and I've got you swapped out, and here's, you know, you've got your new water and your new whatever it is, and here's your new food bag and however that, and we'll talk more in that world. But like in the world of, hey, we want to finish, the whole conversation was, hey, we've done pretty well. It's getting pretty hot out. Like, we should probably take a nap for a while. So now the ground crew's like, hey, we need shade. And it's like day 2 or day 3. And the Boy Scouts don't like you sleeping on the cot the entire time at Herman. I don't understand why. But like, but it was a completely different logistical thing. It was not, I mean, it was, you're taking the boat out at each ramp that you're stopping. When, if you're trying to go under 50, you're touch and go most times. It's going to be very rare that you're spending an extended amount of time on shore. And so the ground crew, it's a different, if it's a different world, it's a different problem to face. Because it's, hey, we're going to get you in now. We've got some stuff ready for you. Here, have a seat, and here's ice, and here's, you know, water and all the stuff. Chill out and hang out. And then we all realize, we finished the first year, and we all realize, well, I could have done that faster. We spent 11 hours on the shore, you know. But it was okay, because we were like, hey, we banked all this time. We're ahead of the, well, now Reaper, right? We're way ahead of the Reaper. We've got X amount of hours on the Reaper. We could take a nap at, you know, Cooper's or something. Like, we can, it's hot. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. Let's stop. So like the difference between that and for the paddler and for ground crew, you know, you're going into a third night, and that's a whole different part of the conversation that I know you've talked a lot about in the 340 paddler videos too, is that third night is a whole different animal.
Yeah, and as a paddler, Scott, have you changed? Do you change how often you stop during the race? You know, are you stopping more often towards the end compared to, you know, when you started? Or
when you're talking about are you talking about survive and finish, or are you talking about racing?
Either side.
Like survive and finish, I think we planned for 8 stops, and we may have had 7. But some of those were extended. Like, we stayed, I don't know, hours at Glasgow, and it was like perfectly cool in the morning. Why did we do that? But then, you know, but as far as like racing, trying to get closer to 40 hours, I think the last couple plans were to have like 4 stops, and then it ended up being more like 6, because there's a lot of times where it's like, hey, there's a storm, or I really need a stop at Washington and Klondike for whatever reason that is. Maybe just to be mentally okay. But the plan is to, you know, carry more and skip stops, and really skip the wrong stops. I mean, I know that because it was a checkpoint, Lexington is so popular, but it is, in my opinion, like the worst place to stop, because it's on the wrong side of the river. You're taking, I don't know, it feels like 45 minutes out of your way, because you got to cross, stop, and then whenever you get back on, you got to cross all the way back, kind of thing. So it's just kind of looking at when the stops are, and then if you're just trying to finish, it's how you can find shade and rest. So like railroad tracks are bad. Shade is good, but don't get run over by another ground crew in a car. Things like that. So yeah, I'd say 4 to 6 stops if I was trying. And those stops when racing, like going fast racing, are as touch and go as you possibly can make it. Trying to finish, that's a different animal altogether. That's just, you know, because really eat, you know, how do you eat an elephant, right?
Carefully.
50 miles at a time. Something like that, where you're just like, well, I'll stop at Miami and Waverly. That's fine. 23 miles between, that'll be great. Like, yeah, that's how we approached it. Laura, did you have a different approach when you?
Well, I think again, with different types of ground crew, we had kids, so we couldn't do stopping every 30 to 40 miles. We were like, hey, we'll see you. And as long as we possibly could, as much as we could keep him stocked up. So for the first couple of years, there wasn't a lot of extra stopping. We did a lot of checkpoint stopping, or doing like Napoleon instead of Lexington. But he'd stop at Waverly, stop at Glasgow, Miami. So it wasn't a lot of like pop into extra places. We weren't along the bank cheering at random places. We just didn't have the time or capacity to do it. So I think it also depends, like, what your ground crew can do feasibly. I know I've talked to lots of people whose ground crew, they have to sleep at night. So they say to their paddler overnight, stop somewhere, that's great, but I'm not going to be there. So maybe they do a water or bag drop, or they have money to buy, stuff from the tent there. So it just depends to what your ground crew can do feasibly. When we were racing together, we had pretty lucky because his mom was our ground crew, and she was going to sleep in the car, stop wherever we need to stop. So our plans were much more fluid than they had been when Ryan raced, by himself, since we always had kids and camper and trying to keep everybody sane. So it definitely impacts where you stop with, how often you need to get supplies, obviously, but it can be limited by ground crew too, just like what the plan is. But we tried to lay that all out ahead of time. We did channel side stops, like Scott said, just making sure we weren't paddling over. That was something I didn't understand as ground crew until I paddled, how much extra time that takes. But we had kind of a goof up coming out of Napoleon. We didn't get our food put in the bags. We didn't get the right food bags. So we didn't have any food to eat, which was bad. So we had to end up flying into Waverly as like a jump in, fly in and fly out kind of stop. And it cost us time. Those kind of things cost time because you got to slow down and come across the river. So that was something as ground crew that I never really appreciated until I was paddling, how much extra time that can take you to do and add stops.
And what other insights did you pick up, Laura, as a racer compared to as a ground crew? What sort of things would you change? Say Ryan decides he's got a bike back and he's back in it for this year.
Well, one thing that's not like for him to change, but that I definitely picked up on between ground crew and paddling is the river looks completely different to you as ground crew than it does as a paddler. His first year coming into Jeff City, when all the torches were lit and it was like a big bonfire and we're under a bridge, and I'm on the phone saying, how do you not see us? How do you not see us? So then, we had that conversation.
It's over by the tiki hut and the construction. Whatever we imagine.
Like, it looks like three little dots, right? Like it looks like nothing when you're out on the river. So even the strobe light, which you would think is super easy to see, is sometimes hard to see. So that's definitely something I appreciate much more now. Things that I would change, oh gosh. I'd probably show up at more stops for him because I did see what a morale booster it is to have somebody yell your name. We got lucky. Jericho was following Ellen when we were paddling, and we were bouncing back and forth with her. And so we'd hear Jericho yelling really loud from the shore at us and at so many stops. And that was so helpful just to have somebody know you were alive in the middle of the river and you feel like you're out in some kind of other planet. So probably just, be more flexible there with places to show up. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't know. Do you have any, Scott?
Man, I mean, again, it's from the opposite perspective, right? Like we're looking at that bridge and going, well, we're 40 minutes away. If I can get a text message out to her, then she's definitely going to have fill in the blank ready for me. And I mean, I already have, I'm like neurotically over planned ahead of time. I want more stuff in the car than needed so that all that stuff doesn't have to be in the boat. Even though I have a plan for just those certain stops, there's a Ziploc bag for every one of those stops that has the standard food, right? It has to have these things, so I at least have calories. I may not want any of that, but I get it every single time. Like, and then there were extras packed. It was like, hey, if there's a bonus stop, this is like snacks that always do it for me. There's certain things in there that's like, hey, these are kind of an extra bonus thing. But it was, oh man, I know it's the next bend, but if I could text now, maybe she'll get that text, and then maybe there could be a cheeseburger. But that's impossible.
Right.
Like as ground crew, that's impossible. You get that text message and you're looking at Spot Tracker or you're looking at your math and you're like, hey, the paddler is going this fast. They're going to be here in 40 minutes. We can't go get this. Like, it's not feasible. Then you have to be the one who makes that decision of, hey, how am I going to tell that paddler as well? One year I had ground crew and they didn't know to make that decision.
Ooh.
They're like, oh, they expect this thing. And so we got to the ramp and he wasn't there at all. Like, I'm running up the ramp looking for people. And that was when I was in a 3-man home-built pedal drive, 2 pedal stations and a paddler. It's a 30-foot boat that's 8 foot wide on this with the almas out, right? Like, you can't just park that and block the ramp. It's not feasible. And so he was nowhere to be found. So we ended up carrying that thing up the ramp and then having to reset everything. He was doing a great job. He just didn't know. He didn't know. Hey, he was like, oh, this is going to make the race. No. What made the race is we got back in the boat and you said, hey, deal with it. You're going to get it in 50 miles or whatever. And maybe you want it, maybe you don't. Maybe it's a breakfast burrito at that point. But, and then as a paddler, I realized very quickly that was not the time to be mad at that person. They were doing what they needed to do, and they were making good decisions because their idea is these people are trying to survive across the state. Didn't understand like more racing mentality kind of thing. So I think on both sides, as the ground crew, as the paddler, it's really determining how you let your emotions dictate that situation. He was there 10 minutes later. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, it is if you're trying to race and do the thing, but like grand scheme of things, not a big deal. He showed up.
Well, and you made me think of something, Scott, is make sure if you're ground crewing, make sure you pack the car. Don't let your paddler pack the car. No, I see you, Chris. No, because I never forget the first year, I was so over it. I had just repacked this entire car. I was like, I didn't know what half of this stuff was, I have no idea what crazy stuff this man has put in this car. Extras of everything. And if you know Ryan, it's like literally everything. And then he calls me, I need the extra this or the extra that. I'm like, what are you talking about? So, that was a lesson that we learned real quick. And then, like you said, go in and get a cheeseburger or something. He heard somebody say Arby's sandwiches the first year, and all he could think about on the river was an Arby's beef sandwich. So, it was something that we had to plan to get on our way to a certain stop so that he could have that sandwich, which was fine because we knew about it ahead of time. And even when we raced, we knew we were going to want Subway sandwiches at Herman. So we try to plan a meal going into the night that's like a pick-me-up that has a lot of fat and it feels very like filling. And I know everybody has opinions on nutrition. That's just how we do it. So we do like a pasta salad, one night, and then the next night, we're going to have a Subway sandwich to look forward to. So, but we planned for our ground crew, hey, this is where the Subway is on the way to Herman. So she would know that that's when we would need it and expect it. So I know that's not always possible, but if you can build in that information, it helps, set expectation.
And this is something you guys have both brought up, that preparation side of things. From the paddler perspective, how much do you want your paddler to be prepared going into it? When they pull up in Kansas City, Missouri, how prepared should they be versus sort of leaving you a box full of random things and say, bring this box down to the ramp whenever I pull up?
I think that's going to really depend on the paddler. For me, and I know for you, Chris, is that we're both pretty neurotic about the whole thing. And we have very specified, dictated things of like, hey, I'm getting this at Waverly. Whether I want it or not, this is getting on the boat at Waverly. And hopefully I'll do something with it. And then others are, they'll come out to the ramp with, a sombrero with snacks all the way around the whole thing, and they just keep rotating their head until you want the Rice Krispie treat or whatever it is. Like the paddler's just like grabbing their little buffet at the ramp. I don't think I could live that way, but in other parts of my world I could, but not in the 340. Like I need to know, hey, this is the thing that's here. And then, if I texted Subway, they know to get 2 different sandwiches, pack them in 4 different bags, and I'll tell you when we get there which one it was, and hopefully you got that one. But but yeah, for my standpoint, I didn't want my ground crew having to think about what I might want as snacks and things like that. I wanted to overthink that so that all they had to know is, oh, in such and such bottle, it needed to be the lemon stuff this time because you can't drink the grape anymore, or whatever the case was. Yeah, for me, I don't.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we packed bags for when we raced together, and Ryan did this before with just when he was solo, is just what we thought we would eat for each, we had every bag for every stop kind of laid out with the refill. And then that got put into the spare, like little lingerie bag that we use for food, and, easy swap in and out. That worked really well. And then we always call an hour out. So he has this little mileage chart, and then he'd say, okay, Laura, it's time to call. So we'd call, and I'd say, standard bag, can you add a couple extra of these, a couple of things. I'm really craving, usually for me, it was peanut M&Ms. So, can you put a bag of peanut M&Ms for me? Because it sounds really good. But maybe we were really eating fruit, or maybe really eating the chips. So we'd have the extra bag that had, things that she could grab out of there if we wanted a couple extra. But yeah, it was everything was pre-measured. Like he did Perpetuum or, Tailwind, everything was pre-measured. We looked like drug dealers driving through like bags of white powder. But and then we wrote on either, I think, the top of the container, the measurements. So like this much water, and these are whose bottles. And that way there was no guessing whose was what, especially in a boat with more than one person. That can get tricky we had different size bottles because it had to be measured differently. So, trying to make it as easy for ground crew as we could.
That totally true. Being after being in the race as a slower tandem, again, it was like just under 70 hours. So it's not like it was on the slow end of it, but kind of middle of the pack tandem, and then solo in the front end of the race, and then 3-man in the front end of the race. The 3-man was an interesting logistical nightmare because we didn't just share one big bag. It was that I had my bags, and Rob had his bags, and Dwayne had his bags, and it was like we all had, and of course we all had different ways to do our hydration too. So we made it worse for our ground crew, but that was all being taken care of out of one vehicle, which was I don't know how they did it. And then I'll also admit that we had 2 different ground crews that passed it off halfway because we didn't have, because of the change to August, we couldn't do the same ground crew. So we had one take us to maybe Glasgow, and then we had the other one pick up and go the rest of the way. So they transferred everything from one car to the other, and 3 people in the boat. And I mean, we caused so many problems. I imagine, like, had to be tough to try to organize all of that. And then everybody's getting different flavors and measurements and whatever.
Yeah, and as a paddler, keep in mind that your ground crew, especially if your ground crew is, for example, your partner, significant other, whatever, and it's one person, you have probably been jabbering at them about the 340 for the previous 8 to 10 months. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence, they don't want to listen when you're sitting there the night before going, okay, I put this here, I put this here, I put this here. And in fact, one of the best things we ever did was have Megan, my wife, go ahead and pack most of the stuff. So she knew, and I know Laura's brought that up and Scott's brought that up. They know where it is. Scott, when you ground crewed for me, we unpacked most of it into the hotel, repacked a whole bunch of stuff, and put back in the car so that you knew exactly where.
Yeah, we packed all of the stuff non-paddling, all hotel and travel from Wisconsin things into the car first, because we don't need that. And then we had an organizational system. And then keeping ice cold is part of that too in the ground crew side of things.
Man.
So how are you dealing with a cooler or some sort, and how you can refill ice very often, and it's recommended. And I know that will be a bigger picture next time with ground crew training. But yeah, that's all going to take up space. And it's not just take up space, but I have to move this so I can get to that, so they can have this. Oh, they needed fill in the blank, ibuprofen, Modium AD, whatever it is, and that's over here. And you got to know where it is, or...
Well, and you as a ground crew need things. And that was something we kind of messed up the first year. We didn't have snacks for us. We didn't plan our meals. I mean, we had food at certain checkpoints, but, we hadn't, our chairs were not accessible. Shade was not accessible. It's a whole thing. You don't want to put up a shade tent that takes a million years unless your paddler is going slower, and then you have much more time to sit there. But when you're going quicker, it's just, you don't have time for it.
So I want to change the focus here a little bit to deal with some of the things that ground crews may have to do that they don't recognize that they have to do, services for paddlers that they may not know, leaving aside butt massages, which are always a feature of every ramp. Awkward if Scott is your ground crew, but he does a great butt rub. Anyway, moving on. How do you deal with, for example, as a paddler, how do you want someone to deal with a hallucination? You come in, you're hallucinating, you're in bad shape. What do you want your ground crew to do? Let's start with Laura there.
I think the biggest thing is keeping everybody safe. So if they're hallucinating, and they're just being silly, and it's, I thought I saw one thing. I mean, I think that happens to everybody. As much as I made fun of my husband, I definitely was a disaster. So I think, though, assessing nutrition, you should be watching the whole time anyway, how much water they're taking in. Are they eating? If you're getting full water back, you're getting full food bags, and then they're hallucinating, you should be concerned. Ask some questions, assess, make sure they're safe to go back out on the river. That's what you're there for. They're your responsibility at that moment to make sure they're okay. So that's how I'd want somebody to assess me. Like, either she's normal levels of 340 crazy, or
Yeah.
There's something scary happening here. And, everybody has their different thresholds. So.
And Scott?
Well, and hallucinations will come in a variety of sizes, right? I mean, I've experienced a handful of different, and there's always stories. And if you look at the 340 forum, there's a lot of people who've said it. But those of you who are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to hallucinate on this thing, just so you know, like when you're looking up at the clouds, you're like, hey, that one looks like an elephant. That one looks like Mickey Mouse. The thing is, when you do that, you still know it's clouds. On the 340, specifically at about 2:33 in the morning, you'll look at the trees and you'll see that they look like dinosaurs or they look like bubble letters or whatever it is, but you can't really unsee it. And that's kind of the difference within the race. It's not just, hey, that one looks like a brontosaurus. It's, I'm not sure that isn't a brontosaurus, right? Like you get to that point, and that's one level of you've been paddling or pedaling or whatever you're doing. You've been doing this for almost 24 hours straight. You're going to have some loss of judgment. That stuff, to be aware ahead of time that that's going to happen. But then have an open conversation about it. So you're like, hey, this is kind of where I'm at. Struggled for a little bit. Came out of that one bend, saw the bridge, I'm good, whatever. All that conversation is great. There are other levels of hallucinations where, again, it's making sure that paddler is thinking straight enough to be safe. And that's a hard thing to assess. Mm-hmm. And race or not, I would say as a ground crew, it is your position ahead of time to let your paddler know that you're going to hold them onto the shore for at least 15 minutes to just make sure that they're pointing the right direction. Same time, they can go to the bathroom, they can eat some stuff, they can hang out, and 15 minutes will go quick. The paddler will think that they're there for 3 minutes. They won't know because it just tends to be. If you get out of your boat, you will be on shore for probably 15 minutes. Quickly. Yeah. But the big thing is to know that this is something that could and probably will happen, and have an open discussion about it ahead of time. Because if you as a ground crew show any sort of, oh, you had one hallucination, like if you're throwing any sort of like judgment and those sort of things to it, that paddler's probably not going to tell you the next time. And the next time it may be more important that they're like, hey, so I was dodging this buoy and it wasn't there. Or, it was, this barge came blasting past me, and there wasn't a barge. Those sort of things, like much more deep, like you want an open line of communication. That's paddler to paddler in the same boat. That's boat to boat in the river. And that is ground crew and paddler, and just not complaining and being grumpy about stuff, but to be like, hey, so this is kind of where I'm at. I just want to make that clear so that we can move forward and be productive. I'm seeing this, it's not right. Mm-hmm. I'm one to talk, because when I did the solo pedal drive, I was doing laps in Chesterfield Valley. I've got it on Spot Tracker. I found a wing dike and was behind it. Swear I couldn't find an exit. Right? And that's a moment where I call my ground crew and they're like, uh-oh. Mm-hmm. But let's talk them through this. Like, where are you? Okay, we know that there's a flashing day beacon down there. Do you see that? Let's orient. Do you see the bridge still? Let's orient yourself and kind of move forward in a different way. There may or may not have been a conversation with Scott Mansker about the river flowing the wrong way at the same time. Don't worry, I was trying to take care of other paddlers.
It's okay, Scott. I thought we were going uphill and downhill in Weldon Springs. So
there's an exit ramp that people don't know about. It's a cloverleaf. It's near the Page Extension Bridge. You got to make sure that you're in the right lane of the highway.
Along the same lines, how do you assess your paddler's health? What sort of things are you looking for that would flag you for, either from a paddler perspective or a ground crew? Paddler perspective, what do you want your ground crew to know, to look for? Ground crew, what do you look for that's sort of an automatic red flag? Hey, we need to pay some closer attention here. So general health. Laura?
I said it already, just kind of like watching the nutrition as you go, because that's going to give you the biggest indicator of what's happening. That helps you assess the health, because you know what the caloric intake is, are they drinking fluids? So I think that's what you want ground crew doing, amidst all the rest of the stuff that they're doing, keeping an eye out of what they're taking in out of the boat and what they're putting in. If there's not a lot of trash, if there's not, a lot of stuff coming out of the boat, that's a pretty good indicator. If they're only eating one thing and it's not high in calories, urging them to eat something different, let's get them a hamburger or something that's more substantial, something that will give them a big boost in calories and fat to have something to burn. So I think that's the biggest thing that you want your ground crew doing, and the paddler has to be responsible a little bit for themselves. You are in charge of yourself when you're on the river. As ground crew, we only see you for, possibly a few minutes, usually not terribly long. And you have to keep yourself motivated. I mean, when we raced, Ryan had us on a schedule, good or bad, as much as I wanted to kill him every time it was my time to eat or drink. Early in the race, I was like dying for my time. And, as we got on, I'm like, I'm not hungry. But we knew that that was our responsibility to ourselves and to each other in the same boat, that you stay responsible and drink your fluids, sharing back and forth together. Hi, I feel terrible. I think I got in too much tailwind when we were, I don't know, somewhere past Waverly, and I had to kind of say no more. I've got to drop this off. It's making me feel sick. So what's our backup plan? Well, it's not a great one. I'm going to switch to Gatorade and give it a try. Worked fine for me. I know Gatorade's a big no-no for a lot of people. It's too much sugar or whatever. But, in that moment, it was stick with something that's going to make me feel, seasick and nauseous, or do my backup plan. So just assessing yourself and each other as you're going. Or if you're paddling near people, making sure the people you're paddling around, if you're solo, that they're, doing okay. If they're not, don't leave them on the side of the river, taking care of each other. I feel like that's the spirit of the race in general, is to watch out for each other, always checking on each other and making sure that, somebody's not truly in trouble. Lots of stories. Lots of stories I've heard of people in trouble and folks getting them to shore and making sure their ground crew's located before they leave, to make sure that they're not just wandering up there and making bad decisions. So.
Yeah. And Scott?
Yeah, for sure. If you're in a boat with other people, absolutely keep eyes on each other and kind of try to force that issue. But most of our paddlers are solo. So we've got to make sure that you're checking on each other on the river. Now, as far as ground crew when you're changing it out, like Laura said, if there's not a lot of trash, or if you're grabbing the food bag and you're like, man, there's almost everything still in this. The first thing I do is swap it for that next one. Like for people like me, where it is a plastic, I'm not going to let them add to the one that they already have. There's already a bunch of stuff they're not wanting to eat, so I make sure that it goes to that next food bag. But yeah, if whatever their hydration system is, if it's jugs or bags or whatever the thing is, if they're not drinking, especially if you're on Tailwind or Perpetuum, if you're not drinking, you're also not getting your calories either, kind of thing. Spiz, whatever it is that you do. And so really checking that. Now, a warning to ground crews very quickly is your paddler is probably, like, one of the things you'd go, okay, they come in, let's see how they're moving around. Is that going to show if they're most paddlers are not going to be able to walk on that ramp. One, it's a ramp. Two, we've been sitting still for days, so like some of the things that you would go, hey, like, you're slow to get up off the couch. You must be having a hard time. Like, as we see normal human beings, or not normal human beings, they will have difficulty getting in and out of boat walking on the ramp. So those things, you're gonna have to look past those kind of moments to check and
Smell
see.
like death, right? As we discussed earlier, they're gonna smell very bad. They're not
you
rotting.
missed that earlier. Your
Okay.
paddler will smell. They will smell because of the river water. They will smell because they spilled their perpetuum all over them. They'll smell because a carp jumped up and slapped them or something. But they will definitely smell because
every year.
at some point they're going to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And whether they have a good system for that or not, which is, there's many videos linked somewhere, I'm sure, on those things. There's different ways, but there's not 100% of that bathroom is going to make it into that system. And so your paddler will smell like urine and river and death a little bit too. That's normal.
As a paddler, what would be the best pick-me-up a ground crew could do for you as a paddler?
There was a Klondike bar at Klondike for me. It was a Choco Taco, and it was amazing.
And I've been through Klondike. You were my ground crew, and I did not get ice cream.
I've never gotten ice cream there, so I feel really left out.
I feel like I asked for it, and I probably regretted that by Weldon Springs.
Oh yeah. I think for me, I mean, I know my pick me up. And going into the night paddling, I want a Pepsi, like a real sugar Pepsi, and I want peanut M&Ms.
Nice.
I'm a big fan, but I know lots of people talk about fresh fruit. I think, you know, I've had several friends say fresh fruit has been a huge pick me up for them. Just it's cold and juicy and really fresh. And I don't know. I'm at that point, there wasn't much that was going to like get me.
Seeing human beings is a bigger thing. Like whatever that is that you asked for an hour out, if it happened to happen, that's a pick me up. But
true.
Seeing human beings, I mean, you're in a tandem boat and you're looking at the back of someone's head and you may be having a conversation, but you're alone. You are not with that person. Like there's something about seeing a human face. If someone that cares about you is willing to refer to previous conversation, hug you at said ramp, that would be a huge pick-me-up. And I know that's a big sacrifice for some of our ground crews with the smells. But,
I know Ryan likes the ice socks laid in his lap, like when we take off, if it's really hot out. For me, my other pick me up at night was I took a Ziploc bag in our dry thing and I had like a face wipe because you have sunscreen and salt all over your face. And going into the night, I just wanted to feel kind of normal. So, you know, that's when you get to, at least I did, I get to take my hat off, I get to take the sunglasses off and kind of like get back to being a normal person. But wiping my face down was like the most magical feeling. I didn't feel so icky and, you know, salty and just gross. So that, and then like little wisp toothbrush that are like this big that you can kind of like, we didn't spend much time on the bank by design when we were racing. So, you know, for us, it was anything tiny that we could put in the boat with us. And my other pick me up was music. He'd never raced with music before. And as much as Chris makes fun of me for singing, you know, for me, it was such a mental distraction. We put a radio in between us, which I know not everybody can handle, but he couldn't hear it.
Away from people like you.
I know.
Or slower, whichever works.
He couldn't handle it. He couldn't hear it because it was behind him and, you know, the wind's going that way. So it was coming right back to me. But it's nice. We've been married for a long time. There's only so much conversation you haven't had yet. That's an advantage with solo boats when you're paddling next to people you don't know. I mean, I know he paddled next to a guy for almost the entire race and they basically told each other their life stories. I mean, we didn't have that advantage. Like, I know everything about you. I have nothing to ask you. You know, so maybe I need like conversation starter cards or something for next time, like a party game and ask questions. But the music was a good one for me. That was a non-negotiable. Yeah.
All right. So from a paddler's perspective, what do you want I guess, what would you do if you arrive at a checkpoint and your ground crew isn't available? How bad is that? Illustrate that for the ground crews who may or may not be aware.
Scott, you already covered those.
I've done it. I've done it. I've lived through this. You know, it's in that situation, it's really tough. Like, obviously, especially if you really know they're supposed to be there. Not just like, oh, we're going to stop at Waverly and hopefully they're there kind of thing. Let's please be more organized than that, folks. We want to know. I mean, yes, there are going to be times where your ground crew is going to show up at places and you're not expecting them to, and they may be hollering your name from the shore, and you don't recognize that that's someone that you're related to. Also have done that. Because why would people be yelling from the middle of the woods? That's not real. That's called New Haven. I didn't know it was a place in the dark. But when you arrive at the checkpoint and you're like, hey, they're supposed to be here. I mean, there's numbers of reasons why they aren't. They could be going to get that thing that they thought was so important for you, which is what happened to me. They could be trying to figure out how to get stuff down to the ramp because they're on the other side of the train tracks and the train is still going through, and that's where they had to park. And that's where, you know, like, because that's the other thing, when you're on the river, you don't realize that they don't just drive to the parking lot and they're right there at the ramp. There's much bigger things going on. They've got to go through a town. They've already stopped for ice. They've gone to the Walmart or whatever it is that they need to do, and then they get through where the train is and they come all the way through and there's no parking. And so then they go back past and another train comes through at that time, because this is how Waverly works, or Lexington, etc. And they're parking on the other side and then walking back with everything. And they've got a 9-week-old and a kid that they've never met before tagging along with them as they're trying to like figure it out. There's so many reasons they may not be there, but it's definitely use the time that you have. Anytime something goes wrong, a storm, whatever that pulls you off the river, use that time for your advantage. Take care of things. There's bathrooms at those places. You could use a real bathroom. You could talk to someone and maybe you get a bratwurst from somebody. You could, beg and something good's going to happen in the time that you're waiting. Or you could be really mad and grumpy. I'm going to tell you that's not going to be as productive. And really, in our situation, like, we were in a boat that had never been. I think it was we broke the 100 miles in the boat before we got to Lexington. It had been in the water that little, and it was a home-built boat with home-built drives, and it was a pedal drive, and it was weird, and it was heavy, and one of the crew was not part of the original plan and just like jumped on board 2 weeks beforehand, so like all those things kind of came together, and it's like, we want to finish, but we also want to finish fast. We're doing all right, but in the grand scheme of things, is that 15 minutes or a half hour, is that a big deal? Could you do something that's productive? I think the biggest worry is that you don't have cell phone signal usually at the ramp, and so if that message didn't get across already, that's changed over the years. Cell phone signal's gotten better. But if you can't get a hold of the person, they may be on the other side of the river bluff, and you guys can't connect. And so there's just kind of an unknown. I don't know what to say. How long you wait? Do you just like use cash that you have on the boat, get some gear that you need to from the Boy Scouts or from someone else, and then message your crew later, hey, we took off?
Mm-hmm.
It depends on where you are in the race too.
Yeah,
and
honestly,
that's a whole different animal. You should probably check in.
So honestly, I've been in that scenario a couple of times where my ground crew was asleep or whatever else. From a paddler perspective, if you're going to go to sleep, make sure we know where you're going to be. Because Glasgow at night, looking for a tent, which happens to also be dark blue and gray, is tricky. Put a glow stick on, do something. And also paddlers, if you show up and your ground crew isn't there, beg. just ask for what you need, move on to the next checkpoint.
We
It's
will
hard to
all
where
help
you are in
you.
the race.
Every one of us will help you.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
If
And
you're
if
a
you,
ground crew and your person needs AAA batteries, someone has them, and we're going to help you.
and if you're ground crew and you see somebody wandering around lost, like a puppy dog, help them, because they don't know what planet they're on or what time zone they're in. They need help, probably. So make sure they know where they're going or what they're doing, because they may need, like Chris said, if they can't find a tent, maybe you have a flashlight and they don't, or maybe you saw the tent set up so they can tell you where it is or whatever. So,
or you have a cell phone with signal.
Yeah, but I'd also keep emergency cash, beg for help. Everybody's really friendly on the race, which is awesome. Ground crews are friendly. The people at the ramp may know who your ground crew is too. Like, have you seen the crazy lady who's pregnant carrying a toddler around here? Then they'd be like, oh yeah, she's over there killing somebody. So, everybody's, because you end up sort of traveling in packs at a certain point where the vehicles around you. The other thing that people do as a ground crew is they ride on their cars a lot of times with like the chalk stuff. So like if your car is really recognizable because it says, we're with Bozo or whatever, they're going to
Their
know.
boat number even.
Yeah, boat numbers or whoever. Yeah, it will help kind of be recognizable, so people could say, yeah, I saw them, they just pulled out, or whatever.
All right. And one of the other issues that we frequently deal with is communicating with your ground crew before the race. I know I was guilty of this my first couple of years, not really saying, hey, here's all these things, or having plans and then they all blow up. So how should paddlers, how do you guys communicate with your paddlers leading up to the 340? Start with Laura.
Well,
yeah.
I will admit, again, Crazy just had a baby mama. That first year, he could have said anything to me and I would have been like, okay, now go, get on the river. Let's go do this. But I think over the years, we've learned the communication that we started setting up, I think probably year 2, when, there was like actual goals being set and kind of what we wanted to do. And it wasn't just survival, was to lay out on paper, estimated stops, estimated times. What is the mileage from each, section to section was a big one from ground crew. Like, so you can kind of do math as you're going, because as much as you think, you get out there and you're like, wait, which mile marker is this one and that one? So the charts that the paddlers have is also really helpful for the ground crew. So talking through some of that, how to read those charts, because there's a lot of numbers laid out and it looks, I don't know, maybe I'm not smart, but it looks like a big old mess. And you got to kind of know what pace your paddler's going. So as you talk through, like discussing anticipated pace, and you're never going to know the current until like the day of. So then you have to be able to adjust it based off of the current with their paddling speed. But we lay it all out on paper, and then we lay out when we think we'll need night bags, for instance. So we pack a specific bag with our headlamps, with our night gear. So we had the neoprene booties. The year that I raced, I knew my feet were going to be cold. So I had my neoprene booties and our splash jackets and things that we were going to put on. And we planned for that to come earlier than we really needed it, because what always happens is you think you're going to go faster than you are. And you don't want to be in the dark without your lights on or without your night gear, without a headlamp. So, we laid out all of that anticipation on paper as communication. We laid out, like I said, kind of like what liquids we need at each stop, what food bag we need at each stop. When I wanted a Subway sandwich, when we wanted a breakfast sandwich, we tried to lay those things out ahead of time and talk through them with our ground crew. And as ground crew, talking through it with my paddler, so I could expect, what they were going to need and when. And then everybody has to take a deep breath when the race actually happens and realize that only probably a quarter of it's going to go as planned. And everybody's going to have to relax and adjust and talk and work it out and figure out plans together. You know, you can't anticipate the fog or the storm that's going to come through, or, you know, we broke a rudder cable. So we ended up stopping when our ground crew wasn't there because we had to stop and they weren't there. They wouldn't have known to be there. But, you know, taking enough stuff to be a little bit self-sufficient on the river is important, so that, you know, Ryan had the tools that we needed to do to get us moving. And, you know, our backup plan was moving seats around and losing water hydration hoses and learning that his wife can't steer a boat and coming up with plan B. You know, so all of that conversation just leading up and trying to work together to be successful, I think is what we do. I know lots of ground crews that do, you know, they start planning early and start having those conversations early on and setting the goals, and that helps the paddler train too, right? If you know you're shooting for a sub 50 or a sub 40 or a whatever Joe Man paddles like 12 hours to get to the finish line. You know, if you're planning for that, it's good for your ground crew to know early on, like, this is only going to take us a day because I'm going to be finishing tomorrow, you know, or are you going to be out here and you're committing this ground crew to being here until Friday night, and you know it's a week off work instead of 2 weeks or 2 days, sorry. Could be 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That'd be bad. Paddling a lot longer, but
Well, we can't all plan quite the way Ellen Robinette does, or
she's crazy.
You know.
But speaking of Ellen, with your planning, make sure you find her Google map, because she's amazing. And some of that, finding the Walmart, finding the gas station, that's really, really helpful. You can overlay it on your Google map and save an offline copy. That's my pro tip. If you save an offline copy of like the state of Missouri, it will help you be able to navigate when you don't have service and signal. It still will work through the GPS. So her map's amazing. And, you know, it helps you kind of lay out where everything is. And also, I know most people think they know Missouri because they might live here, but I've never driven through the middle of Missouri to some of these places. Like, we ended up in so many random cornfields like that, you know, we thought were roads. I know that's a story for another day, Chris.
He doesn't know.
That happened.
He's only seen a 5-mile swatch on each side of the river for the entire length.
Not even. I didn't know there was anything
been to the City
past
Museum in St. Louis. That's all he's seen.
Well, what's really bad is like 3 years later when you end up in the same cornfield again and you just start dying laughing because you're like, how do I do this twice? So, you know.
Yeah, that's between Washington and Klondike, right? You took the weird turn.
You know, yeah, you know. It's really bad. And actually, we didn't turn around the first year. So we went down the cornfield with all the deep rivets. And this farmer passes us and he's like, what is happening? And I'm like crying, laughing, because it's maybe the funniest moment of my life. And I'm so tired and it was terrible. But I think maps like that help you both, you know, kind of lay out what it's going to look like. Did you know there's not like bridges all over the Missouri? So like the first year we had to go to Chamois, and apparently there was some construction on a bridge. So we had to go an hour and a half out of our way to get over there. And everybody thinks sleeping in your car is like the grand solution. Well, I'm here to tell you, if it's a cold night and your whole ground crew also has to sleep in the car, Ryan didn't get any sleep, I can assure you. I mean, we had the 9-week-old, mother-in-law, his mother, me, all packed into this car. We almost got divorced because he ripped everything out of the car when he got there so we could make space for everybody. And I had just repacked it. So yes, sleeping in your car is a great option, but sometimes there's really cold nights in the middle of summer and you're not sleeping outside to let your paddler go sleep in the car. So just something to think about.
Yeah.
So Scott, how do you communicate with your paddler or ground crew going into the race?
Well, it's been different each time. It's the first year it was our wives, and they had their own adventure along the way as ground crew, but they kind of grew up with it for 2 years, because again, we were canceled for 2 years because of flooding, so we had obsessed over it. They had to listen to us for over 2 years talk about this thing. April of 2010 or something, all the way until we did it in 2012. Like, that's I'm sure that they weren't listening anymore, which is why leaning on things like, and of course we didn't know anything about what ground crew was going to do. We're just like, hey, we printed this thing, it's called the Granny Guide. We're not sure who Granny is. We are aware now. But we're not sure who Granny is, but she's got something going on, so we'll start with that and move on. And we had ground crews got river map. They don't need river maps. They just need to know how to get places. But we had everything printed out. But the biggest thing was having things like this, which always pop up on the forum all the time. Some sort of pacing chart with mileage and locations and alternate locations. And then, of course, there's a really nice one that has the map, and it shows the checkpoints, but then it tells you the mile markers, which side of the river for the other things. But we took that, and each year we took it and we turned it into a sheet that can be filled out along the way. So like, oh, this is when he's probably supposed to be here. Oh, wait, he's getting here at this other time. And then they could use that pacing guide to go, all right, well, they're holding, 7 miles per hour. So we've got a pretty good idea. And of course, as as a paddler, you're not going to change your average pace very much after you get going, which is why your ground crew kind of gets to know everybody who's around them, because everybody's kind of in the same zone. I mean, yeah, there might be some passing and things like that, but for the most part, your paddler's going to not suddenly start throwing 9 mile an hour averages out. That doesn't happen. It's going to be pretty consistent, and it's going to slowly fall. And that's to be expected. Whether they said they were going to get to Herman in 10 mile an hour pace or whatever, they're not. It's okay.
And Scott, your piece of paper that you have like their expected time, we also keep, as ground crew, we kept in and out, because if you're doing a stop where it's not a checkpoint, we write down like the in and out for non-checkpoints too, because at the end of the race, if they didn't truly hate it and they're going to do it again, which a lot of people do, they're going to want to know where all that time went. I know that sounds funny, but you start adding up bank time. I think somebody said 11 hours. I think that's what 11 or 13 was Ryan's first year or so. And then he went, oh my gosh, like all of this bank time. So then I was in charge the next year to hold it to 10 minutes. And you better believe I did. So, writing down when you're doing it at a checkpoint, you'll have the. It all
sounds good, but then he stopped at that. That beach along the way. You can check the GPS.
Yeah,
he stopped 6 times right after he left the next bend. You made him get out at 10, and he's like, "Okay, I got it." And then he's looking back. Okay, they're gone. And then
I tried to push him into a storm, so I was not a good ground crew that year. I was like, I'm done with this. We need to be done. Just go on. So don't do what I do. But we did also, if you do the checkpoints, you're texting those in and out times, so you'll have those. But we also found a lot of value in any other stops. Make sure you write when they're in and out, so they can kind of balance out the time there.
All right. And I want to get to one other sort of big question. What would you tell a rookie ground crew who basically says, I don't know what I'm getting into. What is the most important thing that I should know? Let's start with Laura.
The most important thing? That's so much weight. I said the first several years, I said that the race actually happens on the bank for the ground crew. I mean, the paddlers racing, but the true race spirit and the, fanfare and all of that is really with the ground crew. You see how awesome people are. You're getting the race updates. It's like, live action sports. So it's, that's what you're getting into. You're getting into a sleepy week, smelling really bad, hunting for food and showers, not knowing where you're going to sleep. I know, doesn't it sound great? But it's, it's the cool part of the race is the people. I mean, we have the best people. The river people are the greatest. Everybody's friendly. It's just such a cool atmosphere. I know, especially after this last year, everybody kept saying how much their faith was restored in humanity after just being around our river people, and just feeling really uplifting, cheering each other on and stuff. So I think that's what you're getting into. I don't know. I don't have any great, this is the most important thing. I mean, try to relax, try to have fun, laugh until you cry when you're in the middle of a cornfield. It's the greatest story later. Buy one of those rolling wagon things because carrying everything is terrible. And always go to the ramp with more than you think your paddler is going to need. And I don't know, buy some Tiger Balm. That was like one of the big things that helped Ryan one of the years. It's like, okay, so here's some Tiger Balm. So I don't think it did anything, but we just pretend that it's the pick me up. So yeah,
Nice.
I don't have great philosophical, this is the greatest thing ever, but
I would say as a first year ground crew, and I'm going to pretend that you are also with a first year paddler who doesn't know anything either. That may not be their first time paddling, but if you're jumping on board and you're with somebody who's been through it before, hopefully they have found some good and bad to kind of work with, and that gives you an upper hand because they can talk to you about that. But if you're a first year ground crew and you're a first year paddler as well, you got to know each other. You got to know what your paddler is trying to do, what their dream scenario is. Is that sub 60? Is that finishing the race? Is that, what is their ideal world that probably won't happen because it's your first time? But it would be just knowing your paddler and what they're trying to accomplish. And then your reaction to everything is based upon that. If they're trying to go fast, even if they've done a bunch of other races, this is a different kind of race, but you're going to react to, like Laura said, you're back in the boat in 10 minutes, go. But if you are a new ground crew and it's also a new paddler and you're like, hey, we just want to do this, like we want to check it off a list, or like we're completely obsessed now, we've been watching it for 5 years and we want to do this thing, we got a boat and all that stuff, that person, it's going to be a combination of keep them on the water, keep them encouraged, but then also comfort. What can you do? What kind of shade can you offer? What cold thing can you offer when it's 100 degrees out? The positivity that you offer is going to change that paddler's race. You may have had the worst 6 hours of your life. The mosquitoes, the whatever, the traffic, maybe your car stopped doing what it was supposed to do, but you've gotten to that point and that paddler knows nothing of it, and you offer the most sincere cheering, and not just yelling and hooting and hollering, but that encouragement that's really going to help them do something that's ridiculous, because what we're doing is ridiculous. Many of us have done this enough times that it's almost mundane, like, oh, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm probably going to go this fast and whatever else until I can buy so-and-so's boat. This is as fast as I can go. But they know what's to expect, and there may be a storm here or there, and their ground crew may get them a bacon cheeseburger instead of a cheeseburger, and it may change the world. It may be the thing. It may be that you don't drink Coke or Pepsi ever, but somebody showed up with it at Herman and it changed your life, and now you need it every time because you got it in 2012, Chris. Yes, that guy.
Coke and Chamoy.
What's that?
It was a Coke at Chamoy, but yeah.
Coke at Chamoy, yes. But it's being encouraging, but then also loving your adventure. Please love your adventure. It's all about the paddler, but like Laura said, like, you are in a community that is the strangest group of people that you've ever met. Some of them would never be around you in any other aspect of your life. You may be from California, or they may be from California. You may be a teacher, and they may be, you know, some like Fortune 500 something another. And just at the river, you're all just people, and you're all just river people, and it's awesome. And I wouldn't trade it.
All right. I want to get to a couple of questions here from Matt Boehner. For the first timer group, how many stops should we plan for, knowing we will likely make more? So, Scott, how many stops did you make your first year?
I made 8 stops the first year. That was not the plan. We were going to skip more things, but then it didn't happen. And some of them were quick, and some of them were sleeping for a couple hours. And so like we thought that we needed to stop at every checkpoint was kind of our first thought when we approached it, and then we started kind of breaking off of that. And then it was like, we're definitely stopping at Herman, and then we're going to go all the way to the end or whatever. And then it was like, well, Washington looks really nice. We should do that next time, you know, or whatever. Like, we did stop at Washington on purpose, but it was because of training runs that we did. It was like, Washington makes sense. And then if you can't make it the 12 miles to Klondike just to get your head back together, you could go a few more and make it to Weldon Springs, but then it's there to the finish. So you can kind of chunk it. And like Laura said earlier, it's just looking at the system and going, hey, correct side of the river. Best case situation, you know, Lexington is it's a great place to stop, but it's a terrible place to stop as a paddler and as a, no, you don't agree with it at all.
Don't stop at Lexington. It's off channel side. It's horrible. Terrible. Your ground crew will hate you.
But you know what you could do, because you'll get to Lexington, especially first year, you're probably getting to Lexington at 4 or 5 p.m. ish. I mean, don't know your pace. That's a long time in the boat, and you've got a lot of river ahead of you, and you have just psyched yourself out of the whole thing. But if you go to Napoleon, you're only going, what is that, 38 miles-ish? Yeah. You're like, I can get there, and then I will gladly scream right by Lexington on the opposite side of the river. They'll still yell at me. They'll wave, but I will be able to shoot right down Waverly, and it will be... I'll be doing a longer section when it's not as hot. So you kind of get hey, we're going to crush this whole thing for 38 miles. They're going to give me ice cold water, and it will be amazing.
And Laura, what was Ryan's plan the first year?
Oh gosh. I think he was stopping at checkpoints only. We didn't have like a good, you know, channel side or whatever. I think Lexington, we did not stop at. We did Napoleon. But I think, gosh, I'm terrible at this. I think all of the other ones, the goal was checkpoints. I think he ended up, like I said, at Chamois because of fog. But like when we raced, we went, I don't even know how many stops we did, but we didn't carry very much on the boat. And our stops were all planned to be pull in, pull out stops where I jumped out and just stood in the water for a couple of minutes, like literally a couple of minutes. And while we resupplied, and then we pulled right back out. So we planned like, I think 1 or 2 dry land stops where the boat actually came up out. Like Scott's boat was big. Ours was too. We have the big tandem hookie. So you can't really take up the whole ramp easily. So we didn't plan on it. I think I touched dry ground at Franklin Island for the first time. So my legs were pretty done, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be how much are you carrying? What's your boat that you have? Like, can you carry a bunch on your boat? You may, you know, it adds weight. So you may be a bit slower, but you know, it's all how you want to set the boat up for how many stops you need. Honestly, I think what you'll find, at least for me on the river, was it was less about actually stopping as it was just seeing humanity. I just want to like see that somebody else exists and have somebody yell for us. So it wasn't even that I needed a stop. You just needed like a second of normalcy to see people, hey, we're alive, wave at them, move on. So, you know, don't get lost on coming up on the bank every time. You don't have to.
And
it
for
feels
those of
good
you-
to just wave at people.
Yeah. And for those of you wondering why 8 stops, the 340 until the last couple of years had 8 checkpoints. So that's where that number keeps coming from.
9. Yeah.
Well, the 9th was St.
I
Charles.
was skipping one because I was a rebel.
I thought the 9th was St. Charles. That's the finish. That's not really.
Is it? I'm trying to think.
Hmm.
Well, you had Lexington, Waverly, Miami, Glasgow, Catfish,
Catfish or Coopers, depending
Jeff
on your year.
City, Herman, Klondike.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's 8.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I count Washington, so because Washington's amazing.
I'd never even seen Washington until last year. It was the first time. I think
I've got another.
Scott and Dot went out and waved at them, and saw
I've got
Chris.
another question from Rusty. As a rookie paddler going into the race with a rookie ground crew, what's the best advice for going into the race with a sub 50 goal?
Stay off the bank.
Yes.
That's my best advice for everybody, no matter your goal.
So rookie paddler, rookie ground crew. Scott, advice?
So yeah, you're gonna have to stay off the bank. You're gonna have to be well-oiled machine that you can before you get to the race. Like you've gotta know what you can do on flat water on a lake and sustainable, because that's going to be the thing. When you can sit there and run. You can run 7 miles per hour on that river with no stops, and you'll break 50. But you better be able to do better than 7 miles an hour on the river. And on the river, a lot of people are like, oh, well, how many miles per hour am I going to add? It's completely dependent on where you are on the river and what the river is doing. You could be on high water, but if you're on it's not really flexing forward, you're not getting that push, so if you're on flat water and you're not doing 5 miles per hour kind of average for a long day, when I say flat water, I mean lake, then you're going to want to step up some of the fitness to get there as far as fitness goes. I also would bank on losing 2.5 to 3 hours. So if you're trying to break 50, I would be shooting for 45 to 47, because you don't know fog, storm, fog for sure. Like you're not guaranteed fog, but if you can get through the first night without fog, then you can be going, oh, okay, we kind of dodged that. Maybe next night, because to go under 50, you're doing 2 nights, and you're going to be that 3 to 5 a.m. time. It could be just this bend,
Yeah,
and not further. And it's always that thing, you never know with the fog.
Ultimately, anyone going in with a sub 50 has to have a backup goal, because there's so much that is unpredictable on the.
Well, and don't especially if you haven't experienced the mental piece of it yet, like, don't get discouraged. If you hit a point where you're not going to make 50, that's okay. Go get 60. It doesn't matter. Finish the race. I mean, you're gonna hate yourself, if you pull out for just because you didn't hit whatever time, that you were after. It feels so good to even just go finish.
Yeah.
And there's so many things out of your control.
Right.
Like, it's great to have a plan for sub 50. But it's going to take everything kind of coming together. No big storm coming through that you have to seek shelter on the side because there's lightning, while other people paddle right by you while you're trying to be smarter, or whatever the case is. So don't hear what I'm saying and go, oh, well, I need to shoot for a 41 pace then, because that's going to bank enough time. That's not how this race works either. It's not. It's going to be like, you're probably going to lose 1.5 to 2.5 hours to shore time and some sort of an emergency.
Yeah.
And if those things go right, then you've got a little bit of bank for that too.
And
Because you're not going to hold that same pace.
Some of it's just luck. I mean, the storm that kept Ryan back at Glasgow one year, there was, I don't know, 5 people that jumped in the water 10 minutes earlier and never saw a drop of rain, where we were sitting there getting poured on, storm, killed for 4 hours of time. So sometimes it's just luck where you land when whatever
That
it is.
same year, if I would have gone around the next bend.
Right.
I was beyond. I was turning at Boonville, and we pulled off.
And
You
just
saw
a
Guy
reminder,
McHenry pull off, and I pulled off.
and just a reminder, we've been terribly spoiled for the 340 since probably 2014 or so. We've had almost continuous high water, relatively cool years. Let me remind everyone, go back and look at 2012. Low water, triple digits every day. Almost no one sub 50 that year because it was insane. So there's going to be a lot that is beyond your control. So then I've got another question. Ozzy, from one of our panelists from last webinar. Don't make the ground crew guess pre-plan as much as possible. And that includes not just pre-planning, the racer pre-planning. Pre-paddle too, that's called training. But also make sure that you're communicating with your ground crew ahead of time and they know exactly what's going on. They know sort of what is plan A, plan B, plan C. And then this other racer, some Milby. How do you get your ground crew more involved when they insist on having more children?
That seems like a very personalized response. I don't know if I can let Laura take that.
How do you get your ground crew more involved to better support me as a paddler? I think I'm going to hear screaming through Facebook later on this evening.
He said he was going to post something to throw us off.
It's not going to end well for that guy.
So one last question. As a paddler, how would you prefer to communicate with your ground crew when you're on the river? Do you want your ground crew calling you? Do you want them texting you? What do you do? Laura?
We're pretty lame. We just do phone call. We do the phone call 1 hour out. We don't use a spot or anything like that. I did get spoiled 2 years. He was racing with his friend Jim next to him, who had spot tracker and a ground crew who had time to watch it. So we had a little bit more of a anticipation of where he was, but we just do old fashioned phone call. Once he knows he's about 1 hour away, with any special requests. Otherwise, I know that I'm sticking to the plan. And that's also when we know to kind of pack everything up, get moving down towards the ramp, and get the binoculars out to kind of take a look and see where he's at. So,
Scott?
I've always preferred text, because if somebody has bad signal, text is going to send a clear message at some point. Because if the call is not going to go through, well, the text isn't going to go through yet anyway. But then there's not going to be this weird thing. So like hearing things from my ground crew, I definitely wanted a text message, because that's hey, they were out of this. Maybe I need that. I mean, non-important things were coming through text. If it was phone call and I'm ignoring it because I'm just going. Phone call, it's like, why are you calling me? Because it could have been anybody, but it was ground crew. Phone call. 3 in a row was our signal for, you need to listen to this because there's a storm coming. Like, there's a real reason I'm contacting you. So they would never call me unless it was something that was real. And that was just something that we did. And I had the spot tracker, so I could connect with them. We had different things programmed in just so, like, if texting wasn't going, it was like, hey, I'm on the side of the river. So it was like, I'm behind schedule. Check my map. It's okay. Whatever. Or my boat's broken. I'm behind schedule. I might need like real help. Call Steve and see what's going on. But yeah, that was our way of signal. And then the other one was like coming into boat ramps and stuff. Like, we would do, like, each year it was something different, but it was like, whoop whoop or something. Like there would be like some weird thing that each of us would do. So you could have that calling in the night. They're not like shining a giant LED flashlight at my face coming into the ramp. They would, because there's already the strobe, there's already other lights, there's already everything else. They would shine not where I'm not supposed to go to, but where I should go to. And they would verbally tell me, hey, you see this light that's pointing, it's here. This is where you're coming, over here. And they'd swing it, but not at my face.
Yeah.
So getting that attention, because it is like devastating to get a light in your face, especially when there could be rocks and weird, weird eddy out and those sort of things coming.
Yeah, and ground crews, if you're going to holler to your paddler, come up with a name for them or some nickname or whatever else, or a call that you're going to use that they know that's them. Because if you start using first names and you yell, "Hey, Scott," a bunch of people might think that's them, or you start ignoring it. So in my case, my ground crew uses my last name, and that makes life easier. But just something to think about. That being said, we are at 8 o'clock, which means we have hit the point where I'm going to turn into a pumpkin, possibly live on screen. Bedtime awaits. Once you hit about 35, you hit, that early bird special. I have dinner at 4. I'm in bed by 8. I'm up at 2 in the morning. That whole thing. But moving on. Our next webinar will be May 17th, another Monday night at 6:30 p.m. We're going to be dealing with checkpoints and race strategy. I'm going to be looking again for probably a rookie and pack paddler to join me, and I'm waiting to hear from Joe Mann, who I believe will be joining us as well for that one. So looking at the checkpoints, why you pick certain ones, and any kind of race strategy that we work with. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. This is 340 Paddler, hoping that you keep your paddle in the water.